Okay, so I guess third time is the charm. So we're going to try this lecture again. I will postpone the quiz until Friday. You should be able to also find the material that you need in the reading, but I think that this lecture will help clarify a lot of things. I'm going to post the videos separately so we don't have any issues of copyright stuff again. So after this video, I will then give you examples of every single thing that I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and get going. So just to go over so far what we've talked about with romantic ballet and just basically the whole evolution of dance. So we've started with the cradle of Western civilization, the exchange of ideas, that dance has always been a part of our culture, whether it's like celebrating rites of passage or marriages or different times of the year. So we're moving in, and then we started to do folk dancing, and then that moves into Italy, and Catherine de' Medici, then she commissioned Balthazar de Beaujolais to choreograph the first ballet in 1581, and that was Ballet Comique de la Reine, and it was performed in France. And then the French people loved ballet so much they kept recreating, which brought us into and it was still men. It was all the first 200 years of ballet was just men performing on stage, and sometimes they would be dressed up as women. They had headdresses. Came from folk dancing, and then with King Louis XIV, he was very important because he's the one who codified ballet, and all the terminology became French. It's all done in French words and phrases, and he did this because he opened the very first dancing school. And in order to pass knowledge down and to keep this ballet tradition alive, he needed to name all of the positions and name all of the movements, so that even after he was gone, this art form could keep going. So so he was very important, and he danced every single day with his dancing teacher, Pierre Beauchamp, and Pierre and King Louis XIV are the ones that worked together very closely to open up this dancing school, the Académie des Danses. And with that, he had 14 teachers teaching for him, and then they began to shape the way ballet is being done at this time. And then women started coming into ballet in the late 1700s, and now we're into the 1800s of romantic ballet. Marie Taglioni, some people were thinking that Catherine de' Medici was in romantic ballet. She's not. She was almost 300 years before Marie Taglioni was ever alive. And so romantic ballet is, you can tell that when you go to see a romantic ballet by the length of the tutus, the soft port-de-bras, the themes of supernatural and ethereal themes. These are all ways that you can tell. The point work is also very different in romantic ballet because the shoes were so new that they really didn't do a lot of turns and running and walking on point shoes. They would rise up like floating around. They would do soft little steps. Romantic ballet is characterized by lots of small jumps. And then so we're going to move through and get to Marius pas de pas. So then it was during this time period, from 1832 until about 1865 was the height of romantic ballet. We have Pas de Quatre happening in 1845. Giselle was choreographed in 1841, and the ballerinas of that time were akin to maybe what we see our professional athletes now. So they're very popular. People would travel around to come see these ballerinas, and ballet was becoming wildly popular during this time period. And because of that, it was Catherine the Great decided that she wanted to westernize the Russian courts and bring in ballet. And this is both because she wanted to attract and be more powerful in Western civilization, in Western Europe, But it's also because in the Russian culture, they have a very strong history of folk dance and a very strong respect for the arts. So she started to import talent. And one of the most important, she imported several very famous choreographers and teachers. For example, Jules Perrault, he's the one who choreographed Pas de Quatre, which I will post on the bulletin later so you can see that. She imported Arthur St. Leon, who also was an extremely influential choreographer, and he actually married, this is just a little side note for you, he actually married Fanny Elsler, who was one of the 4 most famous ballerinas in the 1800s. And then when Paris got invaded in 1875, she died in the invasion, and then he never choreographed another ballet again. So that's just a little piece of history that you won't find in the book. And then we have, but perhaps the most important person that Catherine the Great imported was Marius Petipa. Marius Petipa was, he was a dancer, his father was a teacher, and then he really he actually didn't enjoy dancing very much, but he was very good at it, and so was his brother. And so they began performing all over Europe. His brother was a little bit better than he was at dancing, and so Marius Petipa was tired of being outshined by his brother, and he went to and spent 4 years in Madrid, and that's where he gained a lot of knowledge about flamenco and Spanish dance and Spanish culture. And you'll see in his ballets that he likes to choreograph in that setting. For example, if any of you have seen the Nutcracker, Marius Petipa choreographed the Nutcracker, and in Act 2, the opening act of Act 2 is this chocolate Spanish, and so that's very indicative. And he also choreographed Don Quixote, which is a full-length ballet, and it's all set with Kitri, who is a young woman living in Madrid. So this is Marius Petipa came to Russia because Catherine the Great wanted him to come up there and be a dancer, actually. So he spent his first 10 years in, being a dancer. And then he hurt his knee and decided that, and then he started restaging ballets and started choreographing ballets. And he's become perhaps one of the most prolific choreographers in the history of ballet. He choreographed over 50 full-length ballets during his stay in Russia. And he worked very closely with Jules Perrault, Arthur St. Leon. He choreographed La Bayadere, La Corsaire, The Nutcracker, Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, all of these. And so what Marius Petipa did, and this is why he is known as the father of classical ballet, is because he really was pushing the envelope of what dancers could do, both male and female dancers. Female dancers, what could they do on point? He started really doing lots of arabesques. That's where you lift your back leg or up to the side and balance on one foot. It's where you he started doing lots of pirouettes, which are turns, so on point. So they would do 2 or 3 revolutions around, and that was very new. Everybody was extremely pleased and surprised. And so in order to show off everything that he was doing with ballet technique, he's the one who created the pancake tutus. Okay, so you can see in La Bayadere, all the tutus are much shorter and sticking out, and that is to showcase the technique that he was teaching and choreographing during this time. So Marius Petipa really pushed the envelope. He created the shorter tutus. He was doing much more work on point with the dancers, and then with men, he brought the men back into ballet. He gave them solos. He showed off their virtuosity with their jumps and beating their legs in the air. And so they'll see that that men started becoming a much stronger part in the Romantic era. Women were primarily showcased. Marius Petipa in the late 1800s. So you want to think of the classical ballet period as actually after the Romantic ballet. A lot of people get confused by that because I think the word classical, for some reason, perhaps indicates older, but it doesn't, not in this era. So the Romantic ballet was first, okay? And then the classical ballet evolved out of romance, out of the Romantic ballet, and with Marius Petipa choreographing all of these dances, that's where you're gonna see. So it's about 1875, and I would say until Diaghilev started his ballet russe in the 1914, around there. So he had a good run there, at least 30 years of this classical ballet. And you will see that these ballets are still performed today by major companies all over the world. There's just some more influence. We've already sort of talked about this. He's expanded the role of male dancers. He has enduring popularity. That's a good way to put it. With all of his his most popular, so like Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, Nutcracker, Don Quixote. And he also wrote, it's also important to take note that he worked extremely close with Tchaikovsky as the composer. They would work together, they would go through each bar and like talk about which were the gesturing, what's the story, what are the movements, and how can the music help help with that, okay? So Petipa had an assistant named Lev Ivanov, who was a young Russian dancer who danced under Marius Petipa and came up as a extremely talented choreographer. And so he actually choreographed several scenes in the ballet. So, for example, when you see Swan Lake, there's 4 acts in Swan Lake, and there's Act 2 and Act 4 are what are known as the white acts, because all the swans are on stage in their white tutus. And so that was actually choreographed by Lev Ivanov. The pas de deux in Act 2 and Act 4, both of them. There's a pas de deux with the white swan that was choreographed by Lev Ivanov. Petipa choreographed the black swan. And we'll look at both of those. As I said, I'm going to post them separately because I don't want any more issues. We need to get on track here. So anyway, he also choreographed the snow scene in the Nutcracker. So Lev Ivanov was an important choreographer, Petipa's assistant, and he helped with pushing forward the classical ballet evolution. Here's some notes that you can see by how the phrase 1, the hunting horns are heard. Then there's 4, this is what's going to happen. So So Tchaikovsky and Petipa were very detailed, and you can see when you watch the ballets that the music really does help support the dance and the story. This is another important person that was imported into the Russian courts and the Russian ballet. We're not going to talk a whole lot about him, but just knowing that Cicchetti, you might have heard that the Cicchetti style, it was a very virtuosic style where he was doing big port de bras, big leaps, lots of turning, a very, very good teacher. And here are some of the so speaking of teaching, these are some of the dancers that actually worked with Cicchetti in Russia. So perhaps some of the most famous is Vaslav Nijinsky. Okay, he was a very important dancer. He ended up dancing with the ballet russe, Serge Diaghilev's ballet russe. Tamara Karsavina, all these dancers actually danced with the ballet russe. So Cicchetti was responsible for giving them the technique that they had. Anna Pavlova, perhaps one of the most famous ballerinas in the 1900s. Okay, so here's some old pictures. So Cicchetti was important in this. I'm going to keep using the word evolution because that's really what's happening is ballet is evolving. And with these teachers, they are forming and molding these dancers into what then inspired what we see in ballet today. These are some of the dancers that Cicchetti's launched their careers, okay? Arthur St. Leon was, he was the choreographer for Coppelia. Coppelia was another very famous class. It was sort of the beginning of the classical ballet era. Arthur St. Leon is the one who married Fanny Elsler, and then when Paris was attacked, she died in that attack, and he never choreographed again. So here's what I really want to start talking about. So we have the romantic ballet, Marius Petipa, Enrico Cicchetti. They're training these lovely dancers. They're putting out massive amounts of choreography, pushing the envelope of what is happening with point shoes and men on the stage. And so then this was a really interesting, this young man named Serge Diaghilev. He was not a painter or a dancer or a choreographer, but he was a big fan. He was in high society in Russia and was in the courts, and he's seeing all these dancers and seeing what's going on with Marius Petipa. And he was also a very big fan of art, painters and musicians. And so he was a visionary. He decided that he wanted to take the very best of these students, of Petipa's and Cicchetti students. He wanted to take the very best of these dancers, the very best musicians, the very best painters, and put on these extravagant ballets, things that had never been seen on stage before. So you can see up before Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, this is, you have the picture that Degas did in Paris of the romantic style ballerinas, okay? Then Serge Diaghilev was bored with that. He wrote about it several times, that he just thought this was so boring, and he wanted to see bigger, brighter, more extravagance. And so then one of his most famous dances that was performed by the Ballet Russe in 1909 was the Polovetzian dances from Prince Igor. And you can see by the costumes it is very different. The women actually aren't even wearing point shoes. So some people argue that Serge Diaghilev and his Ballet Russe were the first sort of contemporary ballet dancers, because he was changing what was thought of as a ballet and what was able to be put on stage. So let's continue on with Diaghilev. He's one of my favorites. So he was a Russian promoter of art. So we've talked about this. He was a visionary, and he was born into wealth. He was very interested in literature, music, operas. He was in charge in 1899 to be in charge of special missions at the Mariinsky Theater. And his first assignment was to edit the yearbook of the Imperial Theaters. And he did it well, and that's where he started recognizing Nijinsky and Anna Pavlova and Michael Fokine and all of these other dancers and members of the Imperial Ballet. And so this is what I talked about, where Diaghilev, sees this, he wants to put it together. And this is a very funny quote. So like as mentioned, he did not have any artistic talent, but he appreciated it, and he had a vision for and a key talent for knowing what people wanted to see on stage, and brought in a lot of excitement. So when he took his Ballet Russe, he was able to get out of Russia before the Iron Curtain, and he traveled all over Western Europe. And at one point he was in Spain, and this is what he says. The King Alfonso of Spain says, "And what, dear sir, do you do in the company?" asked King Alfonso of Spain upon meeting Serge Diaghilev, the famed impresario of Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. "You don't conduct the orchestra or play an instrument. You don't design. You don't dance. What do you do?" Ever charming and self-assured, Diaghilev replied, "Your Majesty, I am like you. I do no work. I do nothing, but I am indispensable." And he was quite indispensable. He actually, there's another little side note. He loved Václav Nijinsky. Václav Nijinsky was a young man who Serge Diaghilev took under his wing and made him very famous. He allowed him to have some choreographic experience. He was most famous for choreographing The Rite of Spring. The Rite of Spring was actually performed in 1914 in France. And you'll see when I post the video later, I want you to look at how different it was. It was inspired by the indigenous peoples of Eastern Russia. Okay, so like in Kamchatka, okay, the Koryak and the Kamchatka Peninsula there. So that, and a little bit into Siberia. But he was very inspired by this. He when he was a child, he traveled around all over Russia by train, and he saw these. And so this is what he did: is he made up a dance called the Rite of Spring. It was 45 minutes long, and the music was composed by Igor Stravinsky, who used this big French horn that really hadn't been used before. You hear it all the time now, but at the time it was just very loud, and when you hear it in the music, you can see it does not look like ballet. And people were expecting this Russian ballet. And as we've noted earlier, because of Marius Petipa and Lev Ivanov and Enrico Cicchetti, Russia has a very, very popular image in ballet. They are on the forefront of ballet. And so when they would travel, the French people thought they were going to see these extremely talented ballerinas doing a classical ballet with a pancake tutu. And instead, these dancers come out dressed like indigenous peoples of the Russian Far East and dancing to this music that some people thought was quite offensive. And so he actually, we're going to skip through. So it actually caused a riot. So you can see here's Nijinsky in Afternoon of the Faun. That was a very actually very sexual dance that was put on stage that, again, some people were extremely uncomfortable with. And then Rite of Spring, the music and the movement was so offensive, it started this huge riot where the police actually had to come in and break it up, and I don't believe that the performance was ever completed at that time. It has been done over several times over the last 100 years. So again, here's some more about the Rite of Spring. So Nicholas Roerich did the set design, proving once again what a visionary Diaghilev was to put this talent together and create these wonderfully new and exciting ballets. And the ballet is about a fertility rite during which a girl is sacrificed. So again, that could be offensive narrative. The music had rhythmic structures, and it had this sort of dissonance that was very, some people really did not like, some people loved it. It was very divisive. You either loved it or you hated it. And then the scandal that broke out at the 1913 premiere made it one of the most well-known and controversial works in performance history. They only performed it 6 times, but in 2013, there was a huge Rite of Spring festival in Europe, and choreographers from all over either tried to recreate Nijinsky's Rite of Spring or put on their own Rite of Spring. Pina Bausch, in particular, she put on this really dramatic, awesome Rite of Spring that I think in some ways she pushed the boundaries also. We'll watch that later. Okay, so here's a picture of what you'll see on the video. This was Joffrey Ballet's reconstruction. They did it in the 1980s, and they used notation, so it was as close to as what Nijinsky did as possible. They even used the notes from the set designers and the costume designers. Okay, we're going to skip. There's a picture of Picasso's. All right, we're going to go through this. This is Nijinsky's sister. You don't really need to know this stuff. What I really want you to focus on is the fact that Serge Diaghilev put together and created this new type of ballet, and he really pushed the boundaries of what was being seen on stage. And in doing that, he actually traveled all over Western Europe. He traveled in South America frequently, and he came to the United States. And it is because of Serge Diaghilev and the Ballet Russe that the ballet came to the United States. And he had so many excellent dancers in his company that when they retired from dancing, they would then go and move to different areas. So I know one is in Brazil. George Balanchine was a dancer with Serge Diaghilev, and when he hurt his knee and decided he was done dancing, that he would start a school in New York City. And he also started a company which is now very famous, and it is the New York City Ballet. So George Balanchine was a young Russian. He joined in in 1924 in the Ballet Russe. they left. They were able to get out of the Soviet Union before before the Iron Curtain, and nobody was allowed to get out. So they were allowed to get out. They traveled all over, and they came to the United States. And he decided to quit dancing, and he started a school and the New York City Ballet. So after Diaghilev's death in 1929, his company broke up, and then this is really where the dancers started sort of spreading out, especially in the United States. And then we started having ballet schools in the United States, and we've taken it further. And then Leonard Messine decided that he wanted to keep the Ballet Russe going, so he made it the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, so it was very different. But he kept the tradition of using a lot of Russian choreographers, ballet masters, and dancers. He actually even hired dancers that were being trained all over the United States. They traveled all over the world. They were a very exclusive company. So they gave their last performance in 1962. So really from the time Serge Diaghilev died, so about 30 years really, this ballet company was in existence, and tried to keep with the tradition of using composers and choreographers and painters to put together these beautiful ballets. Okay, here's some of the dancers, important principal dancers with the Ballet Russe. Alicia Alonso was a dancer with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. When she was finished dancing, she founded the National Ballet of Cuba. Okay, and then has gone on to mold and produce several famous dancers that are dancing all over the world. Okay, here's some more important dancers. Maria Tallchief was one of the first Native American ballerinas, and she became a principal dancer in Balanchine's New York City Ballet. And we really haven't, it's very interesting, and I'm not sure why, but we really have not had very many Native American ballerinas. So that was a big deal that Maria Tallchief, she was from Oklahoma, was able to dance with the Ballet Russe. She joined the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo when she was quite young. And we are going to watch some film footage of her speaking about her experience. She was 12 years old when she started dancing, and her mom would come on the train with her. As she grew and became more sophisticated, she became one of the principal dancers for Balanchine's New York City Ballet. All right, some more important dancers that danced with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo that have gone off and influenced dance in many ways. So Agnes de Mille, she choreographed rodeo, and George Zorich, who actually used to live in Tucson, died recently. He's a teacher at the University of Arizona. So lots of famous dancers. So Serge Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, then turning into the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. This had a great influence on what happened in America in dance. Okay, we have some pictures. Marjorie Tallchief and Maria Tallchief, they were sisters. They started with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo when they were quite young. Balanchine, who started New York City Ballet, there's this connection. Although Balanchine was in the original Ballet Russe, he had several dancers from the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo that come dance for him in the New York City Ballet. Yvonne Chateau, she just died recently. So we're going to stop there with George Balanchine. So I hope that this clarified some of the questions on the quiz. I really hope that this broadcast is posted. Please let me know If there's any more problems you're having, I'm happy to meet with anybody. I'm going to extend the quiz through Friday, so you'll have some time to watch this. Please watch the videos, and then look at the assignment, the discussion assignment that's due on Friday. I hope you all have a great week. See you Friday.